Okay. All right. Okay. Hello, Dr. Hamilton.
Hi. How are
Welcome.
you?
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you for
you.
being here.
Thank you. So
Okay.
thank you, Lisa. And thank you to all of our guests and panelists. And thank you so much for your patience. We all know that oftentimes technology can be just a bear, but we'll take it all in stride and we'll go from here and have a wonderful event this evening. So I'm Bennyce Hamilton. I'm the Regional Director of Diversity and Multicultural Services for Miami University. I'm also our Deputy Title IX Coordinator. And I'd like to quickly introduce our guest panelists to you this evening, and from there I'll delve into some questions from our panelists. So again, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for your patience. Our first panelist is Tracy Duyst. Tracy is the Associate Director in the Office of Institutional Diversity and Inclusion at Xavier University. At Xavier, she facilitates diversity and inclusion professional development workshops and oversees a supplier diversity program, affinity caucus groups, and coordinates ADA initiatives. She's very passionate about her employee advocacy role and works tirelessly to provide support and guidance to individuals as well as teams. Tracy is the devoted partner of an Afro-Caribbean partner and a Caucasian mother of 2 African-American children, Trey and Tara, who are her most significant teachers. And one of the reasons why she has also dedicated her life to being on the cultural proficiency journey. So welcome, Tracy. Our next panelist is Elgin Card. Elgin has had unique experiences as an educator. He started out teaching in his home district of Miami-Trace, which was 99% white, and was the only minority that worked in the district at one point. Then he moved to Princeton City Schools with his first teaching job at Lincoln Heights Elementary, and then at Princeton Community Middle School, and finally at Princeton High School. He served as a teacher and an administrator there. Elgin now serves as a principal at Lakota West, and he's been at Lakota West for 9 years, but 8 of those have been in his current role as principal. Those experiences have allowed him to work with people from all walks of life. He's been married to his wife, Holly, for nearly 23 years and has 4 daughters. Our next panelist, welcome Elgin. Our next panelist is Dr. Anna Bharata. Anna is a licensed professional counselor in Westchester, Ohio. Her private practice is dedicated to working with issues related to trauma, anxiety, depression, life transitions, and so on, and many other things. She holds a PhD and a master's degree in educational psychology from Indiana University. Her research focused on how teachers' life experiences inform their teaching practices. Anna is the proud mom of 2, and her children attend Lakota schools. Welcome, Dr. Baratta. Our next panelist is Yasmin Brown-Jones. Yasmin is Director of Membership for the Westchester Liberty Chamber Alliance. She is known for helping foster relationships to connect community. She's an active resident and member of the Westchester Liberty community and takes pride in helping to build a better tomorrow for friends and neighbors. Yasmin's married to Dante, and they have 3 Black young boys and young men. She has been a strong supporter of Lakota schools for 13 years, where her 3 kids have all graduated from Lakota West. Welcome, Yasmin Brown-Jones. Our next panelist is Aisha Moore. Aisha is a veteran teacher of 22 years. She's taught all ages from elementary to adults over the years. Her current role at Lakota is with LODI, the Lakota Outreach Diversity and Inclusion Program. And she is a leader of Champions for Change, where she is tasked with educating staff on diversity and making sure there's equity for all children. Welcome, Aisha Moore. Again, welcome to all of our panelists. And if you don't mind, I'm going to delve into our first question, and I am going to direct the question to Dr. Baratta. And anyone else who would like to chime in from there, please feel free to do so. So our first question, Dr. Baratta, is when is it too early or the right time to talk to our kids about race?
It's never too early. It has to be embedded in the culture of the family, and it has to be also adequate to the developmental level of children. What is happening right now is that many of us have been faced with the suddenly necessity of talking to our children in a more intentional way. And I think one of the steps that we can start doing is intentionally making these conversations part of our family culture.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to chime in?
This is Yasmin. I'd just like to add, Dr. Baratta, you're, right on point with timing. It's never too early, and I'm sure you know that as a professional. But you can best believe if you're not talking to them, someone is. They're hearing something from somewhere, and it's not always good. So if you don't talk, you're really going to be at risk of them receiving the right teachings or education. So, again, embedded in your family culture, embedded in your household, equality and really teaching your young people and young children, kids, babies, that all people are equal.
Yeah, Yazmin, the thing is that they also, if they come up with their own conclusions, they fill in the gaps.
They do. And sometimes that's just as bad as being taught the wrong thing.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yep. And as an educator for, like I said, 22 years, I always had that conversation with my students because I felt like I had that platform working in Lakota. I didn't put that in there, but I've been working for Lakota for 19 of those years. And my class is predominantly, well, a mixed class, I should say. But I always made it a lesson or put it into some type of lesson to say that I don't care how old you are. I don't care if you're 50, 23, 75, you treat people the way that you want to be treated. And you never look at someone for the color of their skin and say, I don't like them because they're brown. And so that would bring that conversation to even second graders. And they understood, and it's like you said, they're never too young because they have questions. And if we don't answer them, they make their own conclusions. So.
And I would say, this is Elgin, I would say as a young African-American male, those conversations came as soon as I can remember because you had to have those for certain reasons. And we all have heard those stories. I think sometimes our white friends and others, I've talked to parents, just don't know how to have that conversation or are afraid to have it. And, I've been very blessed to be in some really great school districts in Lakota now. And I've built some relationships where some of the families, a lot of the families trust me to have some hard conversations about it and want to know my experiences and want to know my advice. So I think if you don't have anybody to talk to, you don't know how to talk to them, find somebody that can do that for you. And I'm always willing, because if it's for the kids, I'm going to help. So I think that's really important, that you may not feel comfortable, maybe get in the right setting, you'll feel more comfortable to have that conversation.
Absolutely. I'm available too if you're in the district, and I am more than willing to sit and have a conversation with anyone. There was a question on here, Elgin and Aisha, do you talk to people, sorry, moderator, do you talk to young people about race? When, how, do you see impact? Elgin, I do, I see impact. I think kids are processors, and I think once they ask their questions and they walk away, they take time to process those things. And I always call it planting a seed, because you're not going to be able to tell them everything at the age of 7, But if you start to tell them the most important things, they can learn as they go. So.
Yeah, and I have those conversations quite a bit. Kids come to me with different things. I'm really open with the kids about my experiences and things that have happened or I've been able to do or seen, and throughout my life, as I'm 50 now, so I've been seeing a lot of different things. Growing up where I grew up, you know, I read an article yesterday. A friend of mine sent me the token black boy in the picture. I was the token black boy in the picture. The story is very adequate. It was my life, and another gentleman wrote it, but it was 90% my life. So I always want to have those conversations and experiences, because growing up in little Jeffersonville, people treated me okay, but I always felt different because I didn't look like everybody else. And I didn't really realize that until I got older. High school was better because I was a good athlete and I was class president, and people treated me right to my face at least. And I think they really did most of the time. But I look back now and look how they treated some of my cousins. There's only 5 or 10 of us in the whole high school, African Americans, no other minorities. And I think some of my treatment was because I was scoring touchdowns. So I talk to kids about that because I have to. If I didn't, I'd be cheating.
And I would just tag on to what Elgin said earlier, that one of the things as a white mom, and I think I'm talking to maybe a lot of our audience, is that to have the ability to get comfortable being uncomfortable, that it's really important that I have, to Elgin's point, have, I guess, processed my own stuff, learned as much as I can, bring in other role models for my kids as well. So I think it's really important that you process your own stuff before you kind of approach your kids, and use the resources that you have.
I'm reading from Jody Hall Canute. Should I answer that, moderator? Okay.
I think what we're going to do with the questions, the attendees, please feel free to keep bringing the questions in. But I think what we'll do is we'll just let Dr. Hamilton continue with the program. And then at the end, we do have Kelly Casper in place to read some of the questions depending on where time lands.
Okay.
Beautiful. Thank you. This is a bit of a follow-up question to the panelists. The concept was talked about a bit, I believe, Yasmin, thank you, and Dr. Baratta talked about if you don't give it to kids, they're going to get it from someplace, and it's not always the best information. So as a follow-up, the question is, can introducing the concept of racism to your child be damaging or scary, especially if that child could be the target of racism, or if the parent has experienced racism his or herself?
I think it's important that even if it's a scary topic for parents to address it, because first of all, you're validating the experience of the child, that it's okay to feel scared, it's okay to be afraid, but at the same time, able to establish a sense of safety. Right now, you're talking to me, you're safe. Just to give you an example, something to happen to me this week with my son, Danny, he's a 10-year-old. And to give you a little bit of background, I'm married to an Afro-Latino. So this has been a conversation that has been happening in my house for a long time. But recently, it has been more evident to my son since he's 10 now. He understands more than a couple of years ago. And I was watching the news. I want to be informed of what's going on. And he asked me, Mom, I don't understand why they're so unfair and why they're being rude to Black people. I'm afraid it's going to happen to Dad. And so I had to step back first and say, okay, he may be feeling afraid, but I also have to name things the way they are. And the way I did it was, Danny, they are not being rude. They're being racist. And that was very important to me because I wanted to educate him to what the systemic racism that we're embedded is. And he may not understand why, he may not understand, but I had to do that as part of my advocacy piece and part of my education. But on top of that, I said, Dad has a plan. Dad is the adult that knows what he needs to do to navigate. So I'm sure that that's not something that he had to worry about at that point, but it's good that we are talking about it. So there's a lot of layers and a lot of processes that needs to happen. And it may be that kids will bring the conversation one time, think about it, and the next day, out of a nothing, they're having breakfast and they will mention it again. And you're like, oh, what happened here? And so just be prepared to say, let me think about it. I don't have an answer right now. Let me think about it. But this idea that talking about trauma or something traumatic may create trauma is a myth. It's better to validate and to help them process the information.
Dr. Baratta, I might add that what's more traumatic is not taking the time to educate your children worried about trauma. What's traumatic is not understanding as a young African-American male, and I have 3, how to react if you're stopped by the police, or if you're questioned, or if someone says something to you that offends you. What's more traumatic is not being equipped as a young person to deal with those types of things. I think that can cause more damage than anything. So preparation, education, all important parts of this discussion. And I think we're here having this discussion because of the ignorance and the damaging trauma of people not having the education that's important.
And I would agree. I think having 4 daughters, mixed race daughters, white and black, of different tints. So one of my daughters is very light. The other ones are about like me, and the other one's about in the middle. And part of my duty, I feel, and my wife as well, when we have these conversations, is if I don't talk to them, they're gonna get their feelings hurt somewhere else. I need to at least let them know how to respond. And even though, and I'll be honest, and I said this the other day, and it's sad, I'm very happy I have girls right now in this world and not African-American men. And I hate to say that, but I still have to have that conversation with them, because people are going to say things to them, whether it's at school, whether it's at the pool, whether it's somewhere else. I'm a 50-year-old man and been called names still. So what's going to happen to them at that point? If I don't have that conversation with them, at least a little bit, then I'm doing them a disservice.
Absolutely. And I think that's the whole point of this call. We all have different family dynamics. And I think that us getting together and talking to 96 people about, I find a lot of times when I talk to white people about race, I feel like they want me to tell them it's okay, because I think the thing is that nobody wants to sound racist or say the wrong thing, especially to their child. I get it. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times people come at me and they're like, should I call them Black or should I call them African American? They just kind of want permission or guidance on what to say. And I think that's okay, because the only way you're going to learn is if you ask. So I appreciate all the people that took the time to click into this and learn and get educated to talk to their children. So.
I think Aisha, if people are asking, they care. So
absolutely,
encourage people to ask versus. I know we've all seen the news here lately. It's very easy to say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So
yes.
I think it's a good thing to ask and to be show that you do care about.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I think I would add too that when there's things like what's going on right now in the world, or any what we consider more major events, I'm doing both of my kids a disservice if I don't have that conversation before they go to school, because unfortunately in the district that my kids go to, this conversation is not a conversation that they have. And so, but I can admittedly say that I'm always, emotion comes up, and especially with my daughter who has anxiety, I'm like, okay, I have to talk to her about this, because when she goes to school, it's going to be a whole different slant on what she hears. So I have to have the honest conversation. And what I've come to realize, and it's been really a growth process, is it's the choice between protecting their innocence and protecting them. And that's kind of how I feel about it. So however uncomfortable I have to be, I have to protect them.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So that's a great segue to the next question. And and I think most of our panelists are parents. And as a parent, it's important to have a healthy respect of the historical framework of race. How can parents become more aware of other cultures and, in essence, or teach our children to appreciate other cultures?
This is Yasmin. I have to throw it out there. Exposure. Expose yourself. Don't just live in your bubble. You know, one of the things we did when we first moved here 13 years ago, my husband and I, is we would visit different churches. You know, that was our way of just maybe meeting different people. And we walked in white churches, we walked in, you know, Black churches, we walked in different types, and we tried to learn a little bit about their culture from a holiday standpoint and understanding the things that they do. So exposure around you locally, and expose yourself, you know, on a broader scale. Talk to people, and most important, listen.
And I know for me, being at Lakota West, one of the greatest things I love about it is our kids get a real world experience. They're around a lot of different kids. We have everything. And I just told a parent the other day that may be coming to our school, and we sat down and talked, and I said, your child may not hang out with all the different kids, but they will be exposed. And that's what the world is. And so Yasmin hit it right on the nail on the head. Is the exposure of it is really important. And not being afraid. I think sometimes people are afraid to ask the question because they don't want to say something wrong. And I've said things wrong numerous times in my life.
Absolutely.
With kids, there's people of different cultures in our building, and I sit down and ask them questions. What is this? What is that? Partly because I need to know, just for me, but I want to know because I have kids in my school that I want to be able to relate to. And I know my culture, I know, you know, but I don't know everybody. So you have to ask the question. Don't be afraid to say something dumb. Because I tell the kids all the time, people are going to say some dumb things. They don't see me really get fired up all the time. I didn't know if it's out of racism and hate or out of just their ignorance of the culture. And a lot of times I've been ignorant of other people's culture, and I'm learning and learning and learning. So that's why I have patience with people a lot, because I need to make sure I'm understanding where they're coming from and not just jumping to conclusions of what they think.
And I think that's the first step, is getting over the fear and asking someone. You know, you can't be anxious and think that someone's going to get mad at you and say, find out on your own. Somebody might say that, because they're, as a person of color, there are times, and I'm going to put this out there because this may happen. As a person of color, or being Black, a lot of times white people want you to explain to them why. Give me the history on why. And it's not our job to give you a history lesson. So make sure that you do research, and you go back, read a history book, go on the internet, you know, find out the things that you want to find out. Don't always ask Black people about the history part, but it's okay to ask about different cultures. I do it all the time. I'm like Elgin, I've messed up LGBTQ things. And so I ask, I'm like, so what do I say? Because I want to make sure that I get it right. And, you know, you just gonna, if it's an easy conversation, probably not the right conversation to have. So.
I think
Aisha, you're
too,
talking about the racial battle fatigue. It's exhausting.
It is
It's
exhausting.
exhausting, and also it's a generational trauma as well. And
Absolutely.
so, one of the things responding to that question is that being okay being okay of accepting that there's other perspectives than yours. That's the first step, and to be able to listen to stories. Many of the things that we do in counseling and that we can do when we're getting to know each other, especially people from other cultures and other backgrounds, is just a simple question like, tell me more about it. What make you say that? Or what make you think that? And that's something that I teach my kids is like, instead of reacting, if something somebody says something to you that is hurtful, try to understand and listen and ask, so why are you saying that? Tell me more. And I think that hearing everybody's stories and backgrounds, where they're coming from, is a good way to start, the conversations and trying to understand each other.
I would say too that right now in particular, there's not a lack of resources out there. I mean, the people are offering things for free, kind of to Aisha's point about doing your own homework as a white person. And so a lot of times what I've learned to do is process, especially my emotional pieces prior to being in a mixed race space. I think that's really, really important. But I would definitely say that there's not a lack of resources out there. And also, kind of to close this out, for me, I know, don't let not knowing all the history stop you from speaking up. And I will tell you that that was one of my issues as I stepped into being an aspiring anti-racist ally, that I was like, well, I don't know all the history. So am I going to say the right thing? But really, it's real simple. If something doesn't sit well in your heart and your gut, say, hey, that's not okay with me, and just step in. And yes, continue to learn, but don't do what I did, which was, I don't know the history, so I'm really nervous and I don't know what to do. So really kind of move beyond that and just stick up for what you believe in.
Thank you all. So we're all familiar with those 3 A words. We know there's a 4th, but we're not going to talk about that because it's kind of negative. But the 3 A words, there's an ally, there's an advocate, and there is an accomplice. We want to move people toward the realm of being an accomplice because that's the person that's going to go down with you by hook or by crook. And we're seeing more evidence of that if we're watching what's happening in the media. Today, we're seeing more evidence of people becoming accomplices. And it's not necessarily people that look like everybody else, but they're standing in line, shoulder to shoulder, or fighting as well. But let's talk about ally and advocate. How do we teach our children to be advocates or allies for other people? And the second part of that question is, what does being an advocate look like to a child?
With classroom experience, I'm not quite, and I'm talking about 7-year-olds, 7 and 8-year-olds, because I have so many years. That was mostly what I taught. To them, they can't see that big picture. I'll tell you, they see that smaller picture. They hear these things on the news, or they hear their parents talking about, race or whatever. And in their mind, they take little bits and pieces of it. And their main concern is their friend. Well, what about my friend such and such? His skin is brown. Or what if my kids would say, well, what about you? I guess back in the day, you wouldn't have been able to be our teacher. I've had questions like that. So I don't believe, and I'm talking 7 and 8-year-olds, they don't see that big picture of what an ally or an advocate is. They just know that they're friends. They take their life experiences and use those to, I don't know if the word defend is the right word, I guess be an ally by saying, my friend, I love my friend, I love my teacher. And that's kind of through their eyes, how I see it from elementary.
I think about it from the perspective of compassion. Many times I heard people saying, I don't understand what you're going through, or they can say that about the African American and Black population. We don't understand. It's hard to understand how you're feeling. However, we don't want to stay in that empathy or lack of empathy. We want to move to compassion, because compassion requires us to do something for the well-being of others. And in that case, if we teach our children to be compassionate, to be concerned about the well-being of others, that's where we're in that right way. It's not just okay to say, oh, I feel bad that this is happening to you. It's more like, how can I make it better? And so that would be one step. And the other step, I think about the fear and courage. Courage is basically doing things despite fear. And so many of us, and I speak for myself, it's like, I want to be out. I want to be out in the streets and do things. And many of us, it's like the fear of, what if something happened and I have children, and what if something happened to me? And so all these people who are protesting right now, I think about it as courage. And so how can we teach our children to go beyond their fears and be courageous when they see something that is not okay in their schools? How can they, use their privilege, many of them, to advocate, to defend, to step between the injustices that are happening?
I think as an ally, I think it's really important, and I'll probably say this, I could underscore it 10 times, listen, listen, and listen. And one of the mistakes I made early on in my journey with race is that I did a lot of relating, and that's not probably very helpful. And so I would just say that listening is one. And then I listened to the Sesame Street put on yesterday by Van Jones, and I remember a question that came up yesterday that I thought was helpful as well, by a white family, and it was, should I bring up race to an African-American family, like when things are going on? And my own personal opinion is it's more damaging not to at least acknowledge that something's going on when there's silence. I know there was silence in our school district for a little while and just now coming forward. So I simply say with either my partner, my kids, or my friends of color, how are you doing? I know that this world is crazy, and I gauge if they just say fine, I don't push. If they want to talk, then they'll talk. But I think it's a mistake for us not to acknowledge what's going on in the world. I think that's super important.
I'll just tag on to concur all that's been said. As an ally and an advocate, you need to do a lot of both. As an ally, know me, know more about what's going on and how it's affecting me, and then advocate. I don't know, I've taught my kids that there's right and wrong, and it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if it's your brother, your blood brother, your friends. Be on the side of advocating for anyone when something is happening that is wrong. So, be courageous, step up, and don't be afraid to talk about something because you think it might even, hurt someone's feelings if it's advocating for the right reason. Don't let something go unsaid or unnoticed or undone. Hear of it. But yeah, it's important to instill both traits in kids young, because a lot of adults don't know how to do either. Yeah. It's just a good, healthy way for us all to move the needle, as you might say.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We have, at this time, I'd like to move to some of our audience questions, and I know Kelly's doing that, but I pulled some, so if you don't mind, we'll continue on. But I have 3 that I've pulled thus far. The first one says, my son is 7 and he's white. How do I educate him about privilege? There
are some great books out there. I can send the list. there was a teacher that put together a list. I taught a class last year for culturally responsive teaching, and some of their projects were on literature, because that's the best way to bring up topics, is to read a book, to, no matter what age really, and start that conversation from there. There are tons and tons of books out there about privilege and, teaching your child about privilege, and that can start the conversation. And I also think it's important that parents read about it as well, because just because you know what the word is and you've heard it used in context doesn't necessarily mean that you know exactly what your privilege is.
And in my conversations over the last few weeks with a lot of different people, a lot of people don't really understand it, don't think it exists. And that is one of the biggest things I'm dealing with, talking with people now, is, and we've all seen this, and it's an easy explanation that I use is, it doesn't mean you won't have a rough time in your life. It just means it won't be because of what you look like and your color. And that's what I try to explain to them. But they look at some of us that have been successful on this call, that are of color, and they say, well, you did it. Yeah, I did, but there's a lot of people that didn't. I've been very blessed around a lot of good people that understood their privilege and understood the needs. But I also kind of think if you have that conversation with them in that aspect, maybe kids, but with adults I'm having it with in that aspect, and some older kids, it kind of hits home a little bit with some people. And I've had some moments the last couple of weeks with some people that I've known for 30 or 40 years, and they had some thoughts that I didn't know they had in their head.
I work with adults, the champions, which are in our schools, for them to be a voice for the champions in Lodi. And I had somebody challenge me and say, I grew up in Kentucky. It was a white gentleman. I was poor. We didn't have any money. And, he told me, he said, so no, I was not privileged. And I said, well, let's just say when you walk into a room, your privilege starts right then, because you look different than I do. You don't even have to open your mouth. You don't have to tell anybody where you're from. You don't have to tell them how you were raised. You already are a step above me when it comes to privilege. Yeah, all of us on this call might be educated and in a good place, but you don't understand what we had to do to get there. We had to work 50, 100 times harder to get where we are. And you may not see that, you may not understand that, but we all know on this call that we have to be better than average in everything that we do. So
I would add like a resource that to what Aisha said, for adults. It's probably definitely more appropriate for adults. There's a little bit of language in there, but there's an article that I use at Xavier called Explaining White Privilege to a Broke White Person. And it's really, really powerful. So for parents, I would highly recommend that, and then kind of translating that to your kids.
I wanted to add something. I didn't intend to speak on this, and this question is really the whole reason I wanted to have this conversation. I find it to be a tremendous responsibility to teach my children about their privilege and struggle to recognize exactly how to do that. But Tracy said a few minutes ago, to listen. And all of, friends that I have and people that have taught me over the years about my privilege, I still don't feel like I know how to exactly translate that to my kids. But I try to simplify it and to say, if you can get away with something that a friend of yours can't, that's privilege. If you can walk into a store and not be followed, that's privilege. If your sister can drive and get pulled over by the police and not have to be afraid and keep her hands up, that's privilege. If you can wear a hoodie and not have people stopping you and questioning you and asking you what you're doing when you're outside. Now, I recognize that, these are things that have never ever happened to me. And they probably will never happen to my kids, but I need them to understand that it does happen. Just because it hasn't happened to them, they need to open their eyes, and they need to see that, and they need to understand that it does happen, and they need to know that it's wrong. And beyond that, if there's a better way of teaching white children, that's why I'm here. I'm here to, listen to those stories.
And Miss Fair, I think it's important that you tell them that, because it may not happen to them, but where I grew up, and it happened to me with them with me. So they need to understand that as well, to where they're like, oh, just come on. I'm like, no, because I had that talk when I was a little kid. No, I'm not doing that. They're like, no, we're all right. No, man, you don't understand. You're different from me. And they just didn't get it. We had to have a real conversation. So that may not happen to them, but it could happen to a friend they're with. That's why it's important to have that conversation.
And Elgin, I might just tag on to that and say, talk to your friends. Most white people have African-American friends, or have someone that you can have a dialogue with. And I've had the same situation. I've had situations where I've been with white friends, and we've been out, and something would happen to me, and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe you were asked and we weren't. And I recently had a conversation with a 70-plus-year-old white male who said, I just really got it. So I've heard you all talk and talk about the fact, Elgin, that some people don't believe it exists. He's 70 years old. He said, I just got it. He said, I'm sick to my stomach that it took me this long to get it. I've heard about it, and I know that I do have the advantage, but I've seen some things. I've talked to people about some things. It's unfortunate that it took that long, but he got it. So talk to your friends. Don't be afraid to ask questions that are uncomfortable. If they're uncomfortable, you might be growing.
Absolutely.
I think to ask those questions and to be uncomfortable, to teach your kids even when it's uncomfortable, to explain to them. One of my son's friends said, I never thought about where my hands need to be if I'm stopped by a police officer. Until your son, I asked him, why don't you keep your wallet in your glove compartment? Or why don't you have your insurance in your glove compartment or in your bag? And my son responded and said, I would never have either of those, any place I need to reach for them. I need to have my hands where they can be seen. And his friend never thought about it, never thought that was something he would ever have to be worried about. But those are conversations and dialogue that needs to happen, that should not be happening.
Right. I do want to add, because of all of this conversation, silence is complicit. If you don't say something, that means you're okay with it. Now, it might be hard for you to say, and I tell the adults that I work with, these are not easy conversations. But if you don't say anything, that means you're part of it. You're part of the problem. So
I would say too, to close, that the biggest privilege that a white person has is the choice to disengage from a race conversation. And I didn't really realize that until I was advocating for my daughter around a situation with the N-word. I won't get into that. That happened a few years ago. And I have a great mentor who's actually on the session right now. And he said, and I told him I was exhausted. He's like, well, I mean, you can stop. And he didn't finish the sentence for me, but essentially what he wanted to say is Tara can't stop. And so as a white person, we can always choose to disengage and step out of the conversation, and people of color can. And that was something that my partner friendly reminded me just before this call. So I wanted to make sure I said that.
Tracy, that's powerful. That's one of those underlining moments.
Yes.
And I also want to add, before we get off of this, I want to be clear, and maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but I think as a race, in a culture, we don't want people to feel sorry for us. So we never want people to say, oh, you know, I'm so sorry that you have to go through this. You know, don't feel sorry for us. Be an ally, step up, use your words, have those difficult conversations, and do better. So I just want to make sure that people are aware that we're not here to have people feel sorry for us. We're fine. We will get through this. We go through it every single day, and we will continue to go through it, and we will continue to handle it. So you don't need pity.
Yeah, that's the compassion piece that we were talking about, actions. I just want to add that a word that I use to help my children understand privilege is there are people that they have to worry about things that others don't have to because of their color of their skin. And for them, the word of worry is easier to understand than using the word white privilege. Of course, I mentioned the word white privilege, but the way I explain it is more like there are people they have to worry about how they walk in the store and where their hands are when they are walking out of the store, if they have a bag or not. I mean, and so giving specific examples in terms of worrying and not worrying, I think it may help with younger children.
Yeah.
So thank you. I'm going to combine this into these two questions into one. I know our conversation has been around how to talk to kids about racism, but the question came up from one of our guests that asked, how can districts talk or prepare teachers to talk about race? And I say that the other question is, or the other comment that was brought up was that there is a female who, or there's someone talked about their female teenage daughter who's African-American, who goes to a predominantly white school where students often throw around the N-word. So those kind of go together. How do you prepare teachers to advocate for students of color, which is in essence advocating for all students, but particularly in the case of the young Black teenage female who has to listen to other students throw around the N-word?
There were some issues this past year, where I was shocked to hear that, and you got to understand, these are teenage 13 to 18-year-olds were giving other people, Black kids were giving their white friends the permission to use the N-word. And when I heard that, I thought, oh my gosh, that's going to be a mess. This is where at home starts. Parents need to talk to their children, because I'm sure a lot of times that kid is probably going to say it at home because they don't know any better and they feel like they have the permission to use that word. And as a parent, that's where you stop and say, wait a minute, we need to have a conversation about this, not just, oh, don't use that word. There needs to be, parents need to be ready. So they need to educate themselves so that they can have these conversations with kids, because there's a lot out there. There's a lot of things that kids are doing that are not okay. and it's not really up to the teacher to say, you know, of course the teacher's going to say something because it's not something that should be happening in school, but it's not the teacher's first priority to teach someone else's kid about race. It needs to start at home and then be expanded on at school as far as history and things like that. So.
And I think the biggest piece is a lot of people to understand the deep-rooted hatred and what that word represented, because they hear it so much on TV and in music, and they really think that kids of both colors, but especially white kids, think, well, I hear it in the music and singing this, and they don't understand what that does, you know, to a person of color, especially if it's set in any way, but especially it's always derogatory. I'm gonna be honest with you, so don't think it's not. but directly at you. And I was going to bring up, I said there are some kids, and I had a talk with my 12-year-old yesterday. We had a talk about, she said at her school, somebody said that you've got to pass. I said, if they ever say that, you speak up. And she's 12 and she don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but I'm trying to teach her, you speak up and say, nah, that word's not right. I don't care what they said. But it's hard for kids because they don't want to make one of their friends upset. And I tell kids all the time, you're doing the right thing. If they're mad at you for doing the right thing, then they're not really your best friend there, are they? That's
Right.
true.
I think with the experience I mentioned earlier, I guess I would say, and I'm really trying to continue to play to the white audience, you're not going to win a popularity contest being an ally or an advocate for race at all. So if that's why you're in it, it's not comfortable. And I've gone through those stages of, thinking I was doing the good thing, but that's not the reason to be in it. And I remember when Tara experienced that at the middle school that she attended, and the experience or the reaction of the principal was just, I just said, well, I'm sorry, we're going to be at your office at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. And what I would expect from teachers, especially, I know, and I agree with Aisha that it starts at home, and it would be very helpful to have it start at home, but I would expect teachers to not focus on, I'm trying to see how I explain this. Like they wanted her quickly to just be okay. And she wasn't okay at all. And so they didn't give her space to not be okay. So what happened over the next few days is that she really had like pretty major anxiety and trauma, and she unraveled at home. So that the more that there can be advocates at school that also say that's not okay, the better. And what I would close with is, as more of an aside, myself and Catrice Kate are looking into putting together an anti-racism institute for schools, and you should be getting more information about that school soon. It will be happening in the evenings beginning in August.
I want to say also, I think it's so important to educate your staff. Educate your staff about different cultures. If they hear something, whether it's the N-word and someone's okay with it, don't be okay with not speaking up and saying something. So the staff needs to be educated to know that that needs to be a topic or a situation that they need to step up to. I think there can be some intentional training on diversity, understanding diversity, and also in making sure your staff is diverse, because people know people that they spend time around. My friends know me no matter what color they are because they spend time around me. They know what bothers me and what doesn't, what's okay and what's not, and maybe what's appropriate at times. And if they don't, I certainly will let them know. But I think, in education, it's important that training is continuous, because I remember diversity training, 25, 30 years ago in corporate America. And so you have to keep reiterating and stepping up to the plate and being intentional about that additional training and making sure that African-American kids, Asian kids, but especially African-American kids, see teachers and staff and people that look like them, and people who are not afraid to have those conversations when the N-word is used by anyone. Sometimes teachers don't know what to say. We interviewed students locally a few years ago, and they kind of were like, everybody says it, especially if they've been given the pass, so to speak. It's a term of endearment. No, it's not. Again, educate, understand the history and where it comes from, and be intentional.
I would like to add that a piece that it will be, that I wish there was more training, is more experiential type of training in which
Absolutely.
you are forced to recognize your bias. And being able to be uncomfortable with it and recognize it, and obviously your implicit bias as well. I think that's when change happens. I remember
Am I the only one that can't hear her? Oh, okay.
No, it froze.
teaching. I used to be can you hear me now? Okay. And so there's an activity that is called unpacking the invisible knapsack. Peggy
You're breaking up again.
Macintosh.
Breaking up again. That it might be easier to type the information I think people would want to hear.
She was talking, sorry, Anna. She was saying there was an article that came out a number of years ago,
It's
Unpacking
about
the Invisible Knapsack by Peggy McIntosh.
And
You can probably mute her if, can somebody mute her because she doesn't know she's not coming through?
your I'm sorry.
That's okay. Sorry, Anna. You were broken. So we missed most of what you said, but I explained that you were talking about the article Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack by Peggy McIntosh.
Absolutely.
A number of years ago, and there have been several iterations of that over the years. So whatever else you said, we missed it. I apologize.
I was just saying how powerful it is to have those kind of trainings. That is not just information, it's more experiential, because I think the need here is to recognize our biases, implicit biases. It's a change of heart, I will say. It's not easy. It's not an easy thing to do, but I wish there was more of that. Not only at the elementary and high school level, but also at the university level.
And Dr. Hamilton, I don't know how you feel about this, but I say the earlier the better. I would love for students to walk into the doors at Xavier and actually already understand what privilege is, but right now that's not the case. Sometimes that when they step in the doors at Xavier, it's their first experience of even learning about it. And then I would just close with two things, because I know we're going over time. A video called Are You Non or Are You Anti? It's really short, but it's really powerful. I would recommend that. And then I think for me, this was something I used the other day in a group I was facilitating. It says, some people are posting on social media, some people are protesting in the streets, some are donating silently, some are educating themselves, and some are having tough conversations with friends. A revolution has many lanes. Be kind to yourself and to others who are traveling in the same direction. Just keep your foot on the gas.
Thank you. So in the interest of time, I have one final question, and I would love to get an answer from each of our panelists. As human beings, we have really short memories. People are protesting and doing all of these wonderful things and being advocates and allies and even accomplices in the streets, but we have short memories as human beings. So this has been a short conversation. What will each of you do to continue with the process, to continue the conversation, and what is your commitment and what is your responsibility? And I would like to hear from everybody on the panel, please.
I'll start. I think for me, I've always been one that tried to lead by example and do the right things and treat people right. And I know my kids here at home and my kids at school will see that. And I've been fairly quiet. And I'll be quite honest, and I told my boss this last week, I'm tired of being quiet. And for whatever reason, this situation here the last few weeks have hit me pretty hard. And so I'm going to work with him and others to try to make changes to make sure that everyone is treated right and fairly, and that our policies are showing that as well. I just think that it's so important. I don't like to think that I'm an important person, but I also know that I have a voice in our district and around, and I need to start using it. So that's where I'm at right now. I'm gonna start using my voice and having some conversations to make things better for everybody, but especially for our minority students that sometimes don't deal with that, and that's what I have to commit to that, and that's where I'm at.
I'm going to piggyback since we're talking about school off of Elgin. My responsibility, and has been for the last 5 years, is to educate. I'm going to be honest that sometimes in the grand scheme of things, race and culture and diversity and inclusion, some of those things kind of fall lower on the list, not because I want them there, but because of all of the overwhelming things that teachers have to do in a classroom. Not an excuse, not at all. But I feel like this was an opportunity because there's a lot of people out there, that teachers, educators, people that work for Lakota that want to talk about this. And because of the overwhelming things that they had to go through, they had to do with school and testing and all of that stuff, I feel like this should be on the front end of what they learned. I've been saying that for years. So please don't think that I haven't been fighting for that. But now I feel like I have that in to make it mandatory. There's no longer, if you want to go to it, you can. No, this is mandatory, because I feel like my responsibility is to be there for the staff and teach my champions how to be there for the staff. But what happens is it's like we piecemeal things together, kind of put things together to do a little here and then do a little there, whereas it needs to be the same message needs to be communicated to the whole district. So my goal from this point on is to fight harder for it to be first and foremost before we even start talking about English and math and science. Not that those aren't important, but we need to have that conversation first. So.
I can go next. I think of it as 3 different levels. As a mom, continue the difficult conversation, continue listening to my kids' questions without being afraid, maybe just trying to understand where they're coming from, what they're asking, because sometimes we make assumptions that they're asking this because of something, but I'd rather ask them. So continue that, continue preparing them for that. As a counselor, continue sitting with my clients, especially with my white clients, and continue that conversation. It hasn't been easy because usually there's fear, but I have made that commitment to bring that up into the conversation in my sessions. And then I also work at Miami University, so I'm constantly talking to students and working with them. And I think at that age, especially, continue having those conversations with them, and being an ally and an advocate for many of the African American minority students on campus.
So I will go next. We do have short memories. It's interesting, I was having that conversation with my young men. The entire world right now is protesting. And so their question was, what happens when we put the police have been arrested that maybe spearheaded this, and what happens in a few months when things have calmed down and people have gone back to their norm. I walk in my Blackness every day. I was given it 50 plus years ago, and it's an everyday walk for me. And it's important to me to be an ally, to be an advocate, to teach people, to right the wrong, to move the needle. It's been a long time coming. And so I have no plans to be quiet. Working for the chamber here locally, I have the opportunity to work with businesses, people in the community. I will continue to advocate and try to push the needle or move the needle and make people aware, speak up, and do those things that are important to change our culture. It has to happen. There is no if. It has to happen. And I think one of my favorite actors said it best. A lot of what's happening is simply being filmed now. It's been happening and going on for years and years and years. Well, it is being filmed. The whole world has seen it. And it's time for everyone to step up and not have short memories, but to continue the movement to just make our country, our world a better place. It's a sad place to be in 50 plus years later, and the same fights you feel like, in some instances, I feel like there's steps backwards. So no short-term memory here for me in my house, in my skin.
And I would just say, first I wanted to say, because Alicia hasn't said anything, but Alicia Zoga is on this call, and she's my teammate at Xavier. And I have two, Alicia and Dr. Janice Walker, and I feel very blessed to be at Xavier and have them be a part of this. So at Xavier, I'm going to continue to facilitate our Aspiring Anti-Racist Allies group. The group has actually doubled in the last 5 days. And Alicia helps me and my boss hold space in something called heart-to-heart dialogue. So we're holding a lot of space for processing for people of color and white people on campus. And then both in my church and my Sangha, my Buddhist Sangha, there are different things going on around book discussions and films. And then hopefully Catrice and I will get the Anti-Racism Institute together and get that out to schools as an opportunity.
Thank you for that, Tracy. I'm not a panelist. I have been absorbing everything that you're saying. One of the things that should continue as conversations like Lisa and I have had. She's my good friend, my neighbor. Tracy is my wonderful friend and colleague at Xavier. This all started with a conversation that Lisa and I had over the fence in our backyard where we were pouring into one another, sharing our hopes and concerns and fears about what's happening, with our kids, how they're interpreting it, how they're absorbing it. And it resulted into a call like this. And this is something that you all can do to continue the conversation. I will say that leaning into discomfort, which I do every day, taking that step, I talk to my kids about practicing 20 seconds of insane courage to do something, and they have done that. And I'll quote my boss, Dr. Janice Walker, as she says, one of her favorite quotes from Dr. Maya Angelou, when you know better, you do better. So thank you all for being here.
So I too, would like to thank Lisa. Go ahead, Lisa.
I don't want to take up much more time. I'm just in awe of every one of you. And of course, we had over 100 people register for this. So one of the things that I'm going to do is take all the phenomenal resources that many of you have sent to me, and I'm going to push that out to the over 100 people that registered so that they can continue to educate themselves and continue to have tough conversations. I'm going to encourage all my white friends to have that conversation over the fence and to reach out to someone and to really just start thinking about things that they've had the privilege to not have to worry about before. And like Yaz and Elgin said, I am going to absolutely never be silent, and I'm going to teach my children to also not be silent. I think that the first thing that we'll do is start with the summer book club, and I will start with kind of a family book club where we can start diving in to more Black history and help them gain a better understanding.
Thank you. So I'm going to close with a few things. One is I want to thank Lisa and Alicia for having the conversation over the fence, because it just goes to show that a conversation can spark many wonderful ideas. With that, I want to say thank you to all the panelists for giving of your time and for doing the work. And last two things are, in order to continue to do this and to be effective, we must be intentional. We must be intentional. And the final thing is, remember that you cannot be what you cannot see. So let's do the work for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And thank you all for giving up your time. Thank you for filling in the gaps.
Lisa, can I say something? We captured a lot of questions that we didn't have an opportunity to answer, but we did capture them, and we are going to give them to you and figure out if we can get those answered and posted somewhere. Just so the people that know that asked the questions, we weren't ignoring you. We just, of course, ran out of time, but we have captured all the questions.
Okay, thank you.
And if I could say one more thing, I do plan on putting together something where there's more conversations with teachers, and I wouldn't mind some of you guys being on the call because you guys have great experience and great input. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to reach out so that we can have more conversations and you guys can be part of that as well with the staff of Lakota.
And on that note, and we really will close this out, I would like to thank Dr. Hamilton for being our moderator this evening. And I'd like to also encourage you to look into two conversations coming up very quickly that Dr. Hamilton is hosting this coming Tuesday and Wednesday on behalf of Miami. Oh, I'm sorry, unmute. I'm telling you the wrong dates. Do you want to?
Wednesday, Thursday.
Wednesday, Thursday, Dr. Hamilton has a phenomenal group of community leaders lined up for an amazing community conversation. I will share that out with the group as well. It will also be virtual. Okay. Thank you all. Have a great evening. We appreciate you being here. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.